Is it 5:30 yet? Tuesday mornings at 5:30. The So What Does That Look Like Bible study. I'm so ready. I'm so ready for 5:30. Is it 5:30 yet? Good morning. Thank you so much for joining me. It is finally 5:30 and finally time to get started with our So What Does That Look Like Bible study. This idea that we can go into that ancient old book, the good old holy Bible, to find principles that are still relatable for our lives today. You're either joining me here at the live broadcast at www.drginalyn.com. That's GENALYN.com. Or perhaps you're on our YouTube channel or even the podcast, all under the same names, drginalyn.com, or for the podcast. So, what does that look like? Bible study. However, you got here to join us, I'm really glad you're here, glad you came, and it's time to dig into the Word. So, let's get started. We can take this 2,000 plus year old book, this ancient guide, and use it to find principles, use it to find ideas that are guidance that is relative for our lives today. And so I'm excited that you're joining me. Thank you so much for getting up early. And here's what you can do. If you're watching via video, you are able to go right there on the video. There is a dialog box and you are able to enter your name and email, and it will allow you to engage in the conversation with us. It will allow you to be a part of our dialogue. And if you're not able to do that, there is a link right below the video. It says it's the roll call. I am here, where you're able to shoot me a quick email to let me know that you're here. But thank you so much again for waking up and joining us this morning as we prepare to look at one of our faith siblings, Samuel, and get some principles from his life, from his journey, as he attempts to answer his call, but is not quite sure of his next step. What does the Bible even say about that? Does it give us answers for that? So here's the question. So, what does it look like to believe that you have a call from the Lord, but you're not quite sure of your next step? What should you do in that? And to answer that question, we again are going to go to this ancient book that is still relative for believers today, and we will look at our faith sibling Samuel. So if you will join me by turning to First Samuel chapter 3, we will start right there with that text. First Samuel chapter 3. And so here's what happens. I love a good story, but for the purpose of this Bible study, I am going to actually read line upon line, precept upon precept, so that you can kind of get this idea, this notion. So Samuel chapter 3, verse number 1, it says, "Now the boy Samuel ministered to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no widespread revelation." That simply means that God was not speaking. There were not a lot of miracles being worked. There was no like aha moments from God and his presence overly filling up the whole temple, and the glory, the tabernacle being filled with his glory, like where God just revealed himself. It says that there was no widespread revelation. But Samuel, he's still working in the temple. And it came to pass at that time, while Eli, who's the high priest, was lying down in his place, and when his eyes had begun to grow so dim that he could not see, and before the lamp of the God went out in the tabernacle of the Lord where the ark of God was, and while Samuel was lying down, and the Lord called Samuel, and he answered, "Here I am." So he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, for you called me." So that's the opening stage of chapter 3, Samuel, First Samuel chapter 3. That's the opening stage. And I want you to give attention to this. This is why I read it line upon line, so that you can see the details to which the author shares this setting or this context for Samuel. He's very clear in saying that there was no widespread revelation. God is not revealing himself mighty and strong in all of these demonstrative ways. That's not happening. It's so such a kind of basic, no thriller type of setting that the author actually gives details to what many of us would consider kind of just mundane, routine types of things. It says that Eli's lying down, and then Eli's eyes are growing dim, and the lamp of God is going out. So the lamp is going dim, and Samuel's lying down. And it's this general sense of, I don't know if you've ever gone on a road trip, right? And there's not much happening on this road trip. There are no amazing bridges with this dynamic architecture. There are no skyscrapers. There's no huge rainbow shooting across the sky or anything dynamic. You're just riding and you're just looking. And over time, you will notice just mundane routines. You'll notice the dirt on somebody's car that just passed by, or the cows that are out in the pasture, or the trees that are kind of just blowing in the wind. I mean, you just start seeing all of the not extraordinary things because nothing else is happening to look at. I'm quite sure that if miracles and signs and wonders were happening, we wouldn't be so present to Eli's eyes growing dim. So that's kind of the routine, and we have to understand that so that we get that when Samuel hears his voice calling his name, he knows that's out of the ordinary for what's been happening in his setting. So Samuel hears his voice and he jumps up and he's running to Eli like, "Hey, you called me." Like something's happening here, right? There's something going on. And remember, he's a little boy. So yeah, something is happening. Let me run. Let me go see what Eli has to say. So he arrives to Eli and he says, "Here I am, for you called me." And we know kind of the end of the story if you've tracked the story at all, but we'll pause there for a moment just to get this tip number one from that lesson alone with Samuel. If you hear, believe, sense that the Lord is calling you, and you're really not even quite sure of your next steps, we can still take this tip from our faith sibling Samuel, and we can, number one, we can acknowledge that call because that's what Samuel does. He jumps up, he runs to Eli simply as a way of acknowledging that I heard my name. Something different is happening that normally does not happen in this setting. And I'm acknowledging that it is so. So, that same tip is what we can use, that same principle. We can understand that we can be in the familiarity of our lives. We can be going through our everyday routine. We can pretty much have this week, this day, this hour, this year mapped out and feel as if we have a sense of where God is taking us or what we're supposed to be doing. And then something different can begin to occur. And it's that something different, you guys, where if it's anything like my journey, where you just can't shake it. You know that it's not some idea that you just kind of came up with. You understand that it's something different. It's this notion, it's this instinct, it's this prompting, it's this pushing that you can't seem to shake. And my God, it begins in my world to show up everywhere. Like I may see something about that very thing on a magazine cover, or this complete stranger may say something to me, and I know that stranger has no idea of the thoughts that's been circulating in my head, but it confirms what God is saying. So this call, this notion, this idea that something different can show up in our lives. And what I encourage you to do, as our faith sibling Samuel did, is to at least acknowledge it. To not try to roll over, play like you sleep, like you didn't hear something nudging you to go a different way, to take a different path, to go down a different journey. That's what happened for Samuel. He was going through his routine, but something different got his attention. And oftentimes that's what it looks like for us. Because people can say, so what is this call? Is this audible voice? Like, will I literally hear God? And I can just tell you that some people may, like, hear the voice of God. Some people may. For others, though, it can look different. You can just sense it. You can know it. Somebody can confirm it from you. You can read a passage of scripture and it just comes alive for you, and you know. Or you can bump into a person or be involved in a program or go to a particular setting, and everything about that seems to speak to who you are. It is because there's a sense that things are beginning to align, this thing that you're created to do, you just kind of begin to come into that and to know, hey, something's different. Doors are being shut that are normally not shut. Doors are being opened that are normally not opened in my life. What is God up to? So, just really, tip number one is to acknowledge it. You don't have to know everything about it. We see that it was imperfect for Samuel, but at least he acknowledged it, right? So, then that would be my question for you. Are you sensing a call? Do you have this something that you feel that perhaps God is leading you to do? Have you kind of been trying to ignore it and play like it doesn't exist? I encourage you to acknowledge it, to at least acknowledge it. So we'll journey on in the story with Samuel. And so Samuel goes to Eli, as I said earlier, and Eli says to him, I didn't call you. Lie down again. And so Samuel went and he lay down, right? In verse number 6, then the Lord called yet again, Samuel. So Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, Here am I, for you have called me. And Eli answered, I did not call you, my son. Lie down again. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor was the word of the Lord yet revealed to him. So here we go again, right? Samuel has gone, he's laid down. But remember this mundane routine that Samuel has gone through. So when the voice called his name, Samuel knew something different has happened. But since Eli said he didn't call me, let me go lay back down. But hey, I know I hear something, right? So then the Lord calls him again. And this is what I love. It says, So Samuel arose and he went to Eli. Now, the first time, granted, it says that Samuel ran to Eli. The second time does not appear, it does not appear that Eli had that Samuel had as much like enthusiasm, like, you know what, I'm not jumping about this bed running again. But here's the deal. He did go to Eli again, and that would be tip number two. I would say that if you believe that God is calling you, but you're not quite clear of your next step, and perhaps you've jumped out there with enthusiasm and excitement before, and that didn't work out quite as you planned, I would still say in tip number two, attempt again. We watch Samuel, and Samuel attempts again. He goes out to Eli again and he says, Here I am, for you've called me, right? And so that's a critical piece because we can look at Samuel and understand some of his backdrop. I'll give you just a little bit of that. As before he was even in his mother's womb, his mother's Hannah. Hannah was barren, and Hannah prayed for a child. And she told the Lord that when you give me a child, I will give that child back to you. That child is this Samuel. So what happens is Hannah fulfills her promise, her vow to the Lord. And when she has weaned Samuel, when he's of age, she takes him to the temple, y'all, and she literally drops him off. But don't anybody try that. Don't say, I'm going to give this child to the Lord and take them to the church house and drop them off. It is not that day. But that in that day, that's what Hannah did. And Samuel actually went and he lived in the temple with the high priest. So I say that to say, when we come to this part where Samuel is supposed to respond to this call, Samuel is this little boy, and perhaps Samuel has his own set of personal dynamics to work through. Perhaps Samuel has had to journey through maybe some senses of like abandonment or rejection. His mom went on to have other children. Samuel could have felt like, now why am I the one dropped off and in the temple? Or perhaps that was explained perfectly to him and he gets it. I'm just articulating that he's a human being just like you and I and had his own personal stuff, right? But that personal stuff does not exempt us nor exclude us from having a responsibility to, number one, acknowledge the call of God that's on our lives, and number two, to attempt to fulfill the call of God that's on our lives, even if our first attempt has not been the most successful. So whether he was journeying through his own personal issues, or whether perhaps Samuel is in this place and he's working in the temple and he's around the lamp of God and the ark of God. And my goodness, his roommate is the high priest. But Samuel still does not recognize the voice of God. Perhaps that could have been a reason for Samuel to feel like, not going to respond. I'm not familiar enough. I haven't been trained enough, or I should have been further along, should have known better, done so much more by now, all of that. And if we're honest, we probably all have battled with that sometimes, feeling as if, man, what if I woulda, coulda, shoulda, right? But that does not exempt us, nor does it exclude us from the opportunity to still attempt again to do the thing that God has called us to do. I kind of dealt with that recently when I was just thinking about some areas in my life and wondering, what if I would have, what if I, and then I had to stop myself and say, other than to glean the lessons from perhaps time wasted or time not spent in certain things, other than the lessons learned, I can't spend this time wasting time about wasting time, regretting time. At this time, I just have to go full force with what I'm called to do, right? So we have to reframe that and not get caught in that woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff. We have to, like Samuel, just attempt again, attempt from now. Perhaps I should have known more. Of course, I live with the high priest. Maybe by now I should be able to recognize the voice of God. I did, missed it, right? But let me try. That was Samuel, but let me try. And that should be us, but let us try. Let us attempt again. That would be my encouragement to you. And so I ask you that question just as a point of reflection. Is there something that you need to try again? Is it a past failure, a past bump, a past mistake that is perhaps keeping you from going full throttle behind what you believe God has called you to do? Is there um, a misstep in the writing of a song or the publishing of a book or starting a program or building a home or going forward in a relationship or establishing a business or applying for a particular position or just having a difficult conversation, being a peacemaker in your family? Is there something that you know that the Lord is putting on your heart to do, provoking, challenging, nudging you to do? And because that did not work out the best when you tried it the first time, you are allowing that to keep you from attempting again. Well, the Bible gives us a great principle from our faith sibling Samuel. The Bible shows us clearly through his actions that Samuel got up and he attempted again. And that would be my encouragement to each one of us. If you'll join me, you can delve right in at the latter part of verse number 7. This is after Eli has instructed Samuel to go and lay back down because I did not call you. And it says, now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor was the word of the Lord yet revealed to him. And so in verse number 8 it says, and the Lord called Samuel again the third time. So he arose and he went to Eli and he said, here I am, for you, underline this, did call me. Then Eli perceived that the Lord had called the boy. Therefore Eli said to Samuel, go, lie down, and it shall be, if he calls you, that you must say, speak, Lord, for your servant hears. So Samuel went, and he lay down in his place. Now the Lord came and stood and called as at other times, Samuel, Samuel. And Samuel answered, speak, your servant hears. That is like totally cool to me. Speak, your servant hears. That was Samuel's response. And so here again, just to help us imagine this part of the text from verses 8 through verse number 10. So the Lord calls Samuel the third time, and Samuel gets up again. So get that right. He was just minding his own business, doing that routine stuff. Anybody ever felt like that? Just doing your thing. just going on with life, doing whatever, and God interrupts your routine and He calls you. He makes you present to this call, or He reminds you of this call, or He nudges you in a way in life circumstances, good or bad, to kind of wake you up and jolt you from your routine, to kind of signal to you that there's something deeper, something more that He wants to do with your life. And you're doing that thing, right? You're like, but I know something is different. I'm still doing that thing that I've always done, but something is different. That was Samuel. I'm gonna hear my voice in the night. I've never heard my voice in the night, but I'm hearing my voice. He acknowledges that. Of course, we know from reading even today, he runs to the wrong person. He goes to the wrong source to get guidance and insight. But we also have to see this today. He did go. He attempted, right? And that wasn't a successful first venture. And thus he had every reason when he hears his voice again, when he gets that nudging and that prompting again, he had every reason to say, I'm not jumping out there. I'm not going to let myself look crazy. I'm not going to go do that. I just ran to Eli and Eli sent me back. But we get this. He goes again. He attempts again. That was tip number 2. Eli, as we know, sends him back to bed, right? And we're to this latter part of the passage. But he hears the voice for the 3rd time. By all means, who wants to look embarrassed? Who wants to make a mistake again and again and again? But Samuel, he jumps up. And here's the deal. This is what I love. When he goes to Eli this time, he says, "Here I am, for you did call me." Get that? There's this bit of emphaticness and definitiveness about that one little word being added to his statement. The first time he says, "Here I am because you called me." The second time he says, "Here I am, you called me." The 3rd time, although Eli has sent him back to bed repeatedly, although Eli has said to him, "I did not call you" repeatedly, Samuel comes back with even more resolve and he said, "Here I am because you did call me." He allowed his journey, his bumps in the night, his running around and getting up repeatedly, his inability to get to the right source to strengthen his resolve that he's called. Get that?
So, like, really, did we get that? Do we get that Samuel, in the midst of a difficult journey, something that was not smooth and necessarily easy, and he's a little boy, that he uses it to allow himself to come to an even greater resolve that I've been called. I know that my way may not have been perfect, but I've been called. And so, what I note for us, or what I note for myself, is that sometimes when I experience those challenges, those things that seem to be my pushback against this notion that I have about my calling in life, if I've not made a deliberate choice to not do so, those things can become discouragement. Those things can become obstacles. Those things can be the doubt or the fear that causes me to second guess, like, did I hear from God? Did I miss God? Am I on the wrong track? And all of those types of things. And so that would be my encouragement to us, is to learn from our faith sibling Samuel. And just as he allowed his obstacles to do what they did, of course, to have him running around, going back and forth, going to the wrong source, whatever that looked like, at the end of the day, Samuel did not back down regarding his call. He knew that his path perhaps was not perfect, but the fact that I'm called, the fact that something different is happening in my life, that right there, I am sure of. May that be our same disposition. May we be just as convinced, just as convicted, just as committed that God has called us. And regardless of what may seem to come our way to challenge that, or to make our path to that manifestation a little bit less smooth as we would like, we are going to fulfill the call that is on our lives. So, like, really, did we get that? Do we get that Samuel, in the midst of a difficult journey, something that was not smooth and necessarily easy, and he's a little boy, that he uses it to allow himself to come to an even greater resolve that I've been called. I know that my way may not have been perfect, but I've been called. And so, what I note for us, or what I note for myself, is that sometimes when I experience those challenges, those things that seem to be my pushback against this notion that I have about my calling in life, if I've not made a deliberate choice to not do so, those things can become discouragement. Those things can become obstacles. Those things can be the doubt or the fear that causes me to second guess, like, did I hear from God? Did I miss God? Am I on the wrong track? And all of those types of things. And so that would be my encouragement to us, is to learn from our faith sibling Samuel. And just as he allowed his obstacles to do what they did, of course, to have him running around, going back and forth, going to the wrong source, whatever that looked like, at the end of the day, Samuel did not back down regarding his call. He knew that his path perhaps was not perfect, but the fact that I'm called, the fact that something different is happening in my life, that right there, I am sure of. May that be our same disposition. May we be just as convinced, just as convicted, just as committed that God has called us. And regardless of what may seem to come our way to challenge that, or to make our path to that manifestation a little bit less smooth as we would like, we are going to fulfill the call that is on our lives. And that's my prayer. I'm actually praying right now. I know my eyes are open, but I'm praying with them open for each of us, that just as our faith sibling Samuel, in the process of answering God in the darkness, in the process of believing that he had a call and trying to figure out how to answer, he did these three things. He acknowledged the call. Number two, he attempted again. When it was not perfect in his first try, he attempted again. And number three, he allowed the difficulties, the challenges, the things that did not go so smoothly to only deepen his resolve. They did not cause him to back up, back. So just as that was the case for our faith sibling Samuel, I pray that for each of us, that we just go forward in the thing that God has called us to do, allowing our journey and our process to be whatever it is. May we still tap into that audacious courage, that audacious belief that God has a purpose for our lives. It's bigger than just a mundane routine, and by any means necessary, we're going to tap into his strength to get it done. So God bless you today. Thank you again for joining the So What Does It Look Like Bible study, where we examine that ancient old book for principles that are still relatable for us today. I encourage you to subscribe to the website. You can do that on any link at www.drginalynn.com. Any of those links with contact or subscribe, you're welcome to do that. You're also welcome, again, to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can see the playbacks of these. And then also we have our podcasts listed under So What Does That Look Like? Thank you again for joining me. I will see you next week, Tuesday at 5:30 a.m. Is it 5:30 yet? Not yet. Have a fantastic kind of day.